Buongiorno, thank you, Serafina, for joining Radio Italia Uno Adelaide.
Buongiorno. Thank you for having
So,
me, Antonio.
so yes. Now, well, first of all, let's confirm you are in Adelaide yourself, right?
I am. I was born in Adelaide,
You're
and
born
I'm currently in Adelaide, yes.
currently in Adelaide. Now, okay, this article, I'm not sure if I read it in the original place where it was published. I think it was published in something called the New Daily. So, what is the New Daily, and what was this article about? Just a little bit.
It was, yes, it was first published in InDaily, the South Australian
Yeah.
news outlet, and it was republished nationally. And it really is an article about a moment in time. I've spent a number of years living globally overseas, probably over 17 years, and the last 13 or so in the US, in New York City, which I absolutely loved. And we go back every year, family and I. And it really is about that moment in time where, in the current mood of the nation, it's happening globally, where it's very easy to find a face of fear when things are unsettling, when there's too much uncertainty, the world is changing more than we can feel we can, manage. It's very easy to find a face for fear, blame another person rather than look at a system that is not benefiting all people. And that is happening globally.
Yes, okay. So you've already mentioned a few words in the title. I'll read the title. When fear finds a face, why our politicians are using immigrants as a weapon. And then you talk about fear. I'm reminded of the book, also published in South Australia by Des O'Connor, who's at Flinders University, called No Need to Be Afraid, referring to Italian migrants in the time
Yes.
of the Second World War. So maybe there are some connections.
Yes. In fact, Des O'Connor was one of my lecturers at Flinders
Okay.
Uni when I studied Italian. There we go.
Yes. So what does fear have to do with what you were talking about?
I mean, Des speaks of it very rightly. So I don't know when that book was published, but it would have been many years ago. And at that,
Yes.
there was a moment in time where Italians were used as a scapegoat when there was uncertainty, things were changing. People felt that the world before was better than others. And it's much easier to blame those who belong less to a society than to look at what the issues are. And in those times, it was the Italians, the Greeks, who were the new migrants of the time. And then that became the Vietnamese, and the Chinese before that. And now we see a whole new level of migration. And what some leaders are choosing to do, and others, is to blame them. As an example, looking at international students for housing affordability. All the research shows that that is not the issue at all. In fact, that the percentage is very low. And psychologically, my background is in psychology. It is very easy for the human brain to find someone to fear that doesn't belong as much as them and blame them for the issue as opposed to blame a whole system because we are not taught to look at systems and how they function. And this is happening globally. I've seen it in the US, it's happening around the world where there is a lot more, issues around housing affordability, job losses, AI. There's a lot of fear. And in these moments in time, it's very important for leaders and all of us to use those moments to bring us together, to build a longer table so we see our shared humanity. Because what happens when we start blaming others, it's not just about blaming others. What happens is we break civic trust. We break the trust in institutions. Slowly, truth is no longer fact. And that's a moment in time where we are not growing together. We are not building a truly democratic society where everyone belongs and everyone is contributing.
Yes. Well, when you're saying blaming others, there's a word in your article which might be, you talk about otherness. What
Mhm.
does that mean?
Otherness refers to a person who is not part of the mainstream culture as such. We all believe that we are not biased. And this is a psychological perspective. Mehran Bajani is an incredible Harvard psychologist, and I talk about her work a lot. No matter what we do, we live in a system that is biased. We see who leadership is. We see who is homeless. We see who is disadvantaged and so on. So we believe we live in a society that is not biased, but the reality is no matter how unbiased we think we are, 90% of our decisions are made every day based on unconscious bias. So no matter how open and progressive you are, unless you challenge and question that bias, you are walking around making decisions that are biased. And that's okay. We put a shame factor on that, and it doesn't need to be shamed at all. Psychologically, that's how we're wired. But we do need to question why we make certain decisions, why leaders are saying certain things, some leaders. So when some leaders are saying things that are, you hear the language of invasion or others or scapegoating, we need to question, what is that person really trying to help? What are they trying to get us to think? We have to question bridges and not breaking, our shared society.
Yes, okay. These biases, you say, are useful. I guess they can make us make decisions easier to make. But when you're talking about others, I guess you're saying if something or somebody is different from us, we don't know that reality and it's harder to understand. Does that make it easier to see that as a threat or as something that's undermining our life?
Possibly, it depends how curious you are,
Yeah.
or it depends how open you are to difference. Like, often what happens in general in suburbs, if you have a neighbor that is different to a cultural background of yours or different perspective, getting to know that person reduces your bias. There was incredible research done many years ago by Dr. Pamela Ryan, Deliberations Australia, and they brought over 200 people from across Australia together for, facilitated discussions around diversity, First Nation representation, so many things. And over those days, what they found is that there was a huge increase in people understanding each other, spending time together, being uncomfortable in those conversations. And we tend to have this idea that we shouldn't be uncomfortable. Actually, it's important to be uncomfortable. You only grow when you're uncomfortable. And often when we have a different political viewpoint to our family member or our friend, or it could be in terms of any form of difference that religion or any form of difference. Because you actually learn something new about that person and you don't demonize that person. You get to know them better, but you have to be open and respectful. And those conversations respectfully, where we see our shared humanity, are more important than ever in these days where there is more uncertainty.
Okay, I can see your psychology background coming up very importantly. And I think that's an important insight because I've heard lots of analysis around this phenomenon of one nation growing very quickly. And people say they have no solutions, they just point at problems. And the apparent explanation is that there's a lot of hurt and people feel left out from well-being in society and community. Maybe that's what you're reflecting in your analysis. So should we use psychology a lot in politics and economics a lot more than we do?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand how we think as people. And I think that's an example of how you can scapegoat rather than looking at a system that doesn't benefit everyone in a moment of change that is happening globally, in a sense. So it's important that we build that longer table. Actually, there's an amazing quote by Brene Brown. She's a researcher and she's written a book called Braving the Wilderness. And she warns that when fear dominates, we will give our power to anyone who can promise easy answers and give us an enemy to blame. The question is whether we are willing to offer something better. So all leadership should not be driven by fear. All leadership be it political, corporate, government, non-profit, all leadership, religious, should be led with integrity and openness and values, not fear. As soon as you start seeing the fear, I question that. Why are they trying to scare me? You know, in moments where things are tougher for people, that's when you build a longer table. That's when you bring people together. You know, 1 + 1 = 10 when we're together, when we see each other and help each other out. You don't close the door. You don't, cut off the table. That's not how you prosper as a society. That's not how you prosper as an individual or a family. Opening up that table to others, learning about others, that is the answer in these moments. I mean, a lot of my work is around how we see our shared humanity. That is the answer. It's very simple, actually.
Yes, very simple. In your article, you give a couple of anecdotes from your own personal life of having been targeted, maybe not you directly, as an immigrant. Can you just recount that for our listeners?
Sure. So my first memory as a child was, one of my first memories, we were living in Rostrevor at the time. And I remember my father was, at the fountain on the side of the home, at the front of our home, just cleaning the fountain. And I was jumping some bushes. And I actually remember being a little bit upset with my grandfather who used to trim the bushes, because I used to love hurdles when I was a little kid. And so he trimmed the bushes, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I really wanted them to grow, but of course you have to trim them. And I was jumping on the bushes outside, and a young guy, teenager on a bicycle, rode past and said a word that I had no idea what that word was. But I looked over at my father, and I saw him in his stillness, because he'd obviously heard the word, it was directed toward him. And I saw tears in his eyes. And he didn't say anything, didn't do anything, and just was still. And that moment, I knew that word, which a lot of us were called, was a negative word. And I do remember that word actually, that moment actually shaped a lot of how I see the world, not in a negative way, actually. For me, it was a moment about the othering and what would it look like to walk in someone else's shoes. And a lot of my work globally, having lived across the Middle East, the US, worked across Asia, has been around, building leadership programs that are global, that are inclusive. So it really has shaped who I am. So although a very difficult moment, it was also a moment of understanding our shared humanity and seeing what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes.
Yes, and then you mentioned an anecdote from your daughter.
Yes, and then when we moved back from New York during COVID, a similar thing happened where there was a name hurled at her, and I was really shocked.
That was just a few years ago.
That was just a few years ago. Yeah.
We're not talking about 50s or 60s.
No, we're not talking about 50s. And it happens. I mean, among all the work that I do, I also work in schools to build culturally agile classrooms and develop programs around anti-racism. So if something is in society, it's going to be in the workplace, it's going to be in the education sector. We may not see it if we're not affected by it, but it is happening. It is happening.
So your daughter, just 4 years ago, 5 years ago, was
yes. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. I hear stories a lot in schools, in workplaces. Yes. So our role is, how do we, in these times where there is more uncertainty, when we see that happening and it may not affect us, being silent is also complicit. It's very hard for us to do. It's asking a question, what did you mean by that? Or that's not okay. It's really important that all of us, stand up in a way that's comfortable for us. And often I tell people, if you feel bad, getting involved in a discussion that you see is not right, the best thing to do is ask a question. What did you mean by that? That diffuses it and it helps people out. Leaders have challenges doing this. everyday people have challenges doing this. They'd rather just not say anything, even though they don't agree with it.
Now, you've given us some hints about your professional career. Let's talk about Serafina Maiorano's story. And you already said your Italian background, so with a name like Serafina, have to be. So first, the professional bit. What have you been doing traipsing around the world?
Yeah, so I've led a life of curiosity, and I've been very fortunate to have various leadership roles. I did start my career in the arts in cross-cultural practice with Doppio Teatro, actually, Italian
Ah,
Australian theatre company many years ago.
Teresa.
Um, so I used to work with Teresa, yes, who's an
Yes.
amazing individual and a good organization. So I worked there for a number of years and then worked in the arts in Melbourne and Sydney for a while, and then went global doing research around arts and human rights, the intersection of arts and human rights. I then worked in the Middle East for a number of years in capacity building programs in the region, and then moved to New York in 2008, actually, when Obama first won the presidency. And that was to lead a global diaspora network, an Australian diaspora network, whose patron is the Prime Minister of Australia and partly funded by DFAT. And that was really about harnessing the power of our Australian expats overseas and alumni of Australian universities and building a bridge for the IP and the innovation to flow back into the country and mentor the next generation of global young Australian leaders. So I was global CEO for that organisation, Global Australians, for about 13 years. And we developed incredible programs, helped startups, Australian startups scale into overseas markets, honour global game changers and innovators who were doing extraordinary things, and working with government to explore how these incredible Australians and alumni could be a resource to the country as part of soft diplomacy, trade and investment, because many individuals who are doing incredibly well, who are seniors in their field across every endeavour, science, education, manufacturing, green technology, the arts, social impact, they're working in geographies and markets and industries relevant to Australia's growth. So I led that organisation for about 13 years and then moved back to Australia during COVID and have a portfolio career now. I'm on a couple of boards, the History Trust of South Australia. I'm on a US Foundation board where we fund social entrepreneurs and impact investors, as well as an education and future skills, and have my own advisory firm, Our Global Table, where we build inclusive leadership programs across organisations in the education system. So a few different things.
Yes, very, very interesting. And I guess cultural openness in the Middle East must have been quite an interesting topic.
So, sorry, say that again.
Developing cultural openness in the Middle East would have been quite
yes.
quite a topic. Yes.
Yeah, I loved my time there. I worked in Dubai and Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Qatar. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time there. It was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Okay, now you said you studied Italian with Des O'Connor and others, and I guess Tony Comyn from those days. And we
Yeah.
probably could have done this interview in Italian then. But tell us a bit about your Italianness.
I'm incredibly grateful for my Italianness. So I'm a first generation Australian of Italian background, as is my brother, who's a couple of years older than me, in our family. So my dad came to Australia when he was 15 and mum came when she was 18 from the south of Italy, from Campania. And Italianness has always been a very intrinsic part of who I am. Hence, I ended up studying, Italian, and then I did an honours degree in Italian language and literature where I studied Italo Calvino, Dante
Right?
Alighieri many years ago. And then so many years ago, I won a scholarship to study at the Università di Perugia, and I studied European economics there. This is like in the 90s, so a long time ago.
Yes.
and have ended up living in Italy for a while and teaching English there for a while. This is in the 90s, and have been back many, many times. There's a part of you that comes out that is different, a different identity when I'm there and when I speak the language, and yeah, I'm immersed in the culture. And my first job was in theatre, Italian Australian theatre. So it has been a very important part of my life. And I think, like many Australians, 50% of us either have one parent or both who are born overseas. I think it, I think I've benefited from that with my global experience. It's helped me be global because I do believe that because of otherness, being Italian is not other now, but in those days it was, as there's another way of life, another way of being. And that actually opened up a whole world to me. And I think in that era too, for me, being Australian was being a global citizen, connected to Italy, deeply connected to Australia. That was a time of creative nation, Asia Pacific. So I think my upbringing in Australia and being of Italian descent has helped me live a global life. So I'm incredibly grateful, incredibly
Yes.
grateful.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously you like traveling because you said you've been to Italy and worked there, lived there for a while, as well as going to the Middle East and the United States. And Campania, can we be a bit more precise in Campania? Where are the origins?
Both my parents are from Tricello, so that's a town between Campobasso and Benevento, about 40 minutes. I don't know,
Okay.
half an hour, 40-minute drive. Yeah.
Drive, yeah.
So a
So,
small town, I think 3,000 people.
hmm, yeah, yeah. And you've mentioned the daughter. So does the daughter or any other children, do they speak Italian? Do they feel Italian?
My daughter is studying Italian, and she's 13 now, and she was also studying Italian in New York when we were in Brooklyn as well, and has been to Italy many times.
Yeah.
She used to do,
Okay.
actually, when she was 4 or 5, she used to do summer camps there. They had these 2-week intensive summer camps. So she used to do that as well. So she does speak a little bit of Italian with Nonna.
Oh, well. Well, time is running out. There's lots of themes in what you've discussed. Maybe you'll have a few more conversations over time, if you agree. So, but I'll say again, thank you for
Absolutely.
coming on to Radio Italia Una Adelaide and giving us this different perspective and understanding some psychological forces behind what might be happening and how to deal with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
for having
again,
me.